All right, joining me now to continue the conversation about torture is Ivan Eland. He's a senior fellow and director of the Center on Peace and Liberty at the Independent Institute and the author of The Empire Has No Clothes. Thanks for being with us today, Ivan. Let's start with perhaps the most obvious question. Why do you think the Pentagon fought so hard to keep these photos under wraps?
Well, I think there are some very bad photos in there, and the judge even sort of said that when he did earlier, when he said, well, you know, these pictures may lead to harm against Americans in retaliation for the torture, but these ones we can release here, these 200, are rather innocuous. Well, that's kind of a curious standard because in the U.S. system, even if these do cause harm to people, Americans overseas, you know, there's an even worse outcome, and that is that these pictures are censored by the government and that people don't know what went on. The torture is illegal under U.S. law and under international law, and the administration of George W. Bush during the Iraq War and the Afghan War violated those international laws and domestic laws, and Obama didn't choose to prosecute him. But I think you know, these pictures need to be released so everyone can see what happened, so it doesn't happen again. This goes to the core of the U.S. system of freedom of the press, freedom of expression, etc. And you know, it's bad when retaliation happens overseas against Americans, if it does, but of course we don't know if it will or not. But the more important principle in the U.S. should be disclosure of what its government does, because that's part of a republic. The people need to know what's been done in their name.
Okay, so you think this is simply more of a case than about disclosure and transparency than anything else?
Yeah, I think the security rationale is nonsense. And the problem in the U.S. is that judges give the government too much leeway in national security cases. They cower whenever the term national security is brought up. And I think that judge should have said, you know, you need to release all these. So we don't say we can release some of them because they're innocuous and they won't cause any harm, and the other ones that are worse, the vast majority of them apparently shouldn't be released because of this harm. Well, if the people are harmed overseas and they are U.S. citizens, it's something that the government is responsible for in the first place by torturing. So I think you know, we really need to get the dirty laundry out here, and that's part of being a republic. Everything's not always sweet and nice.
Now these are only 198 out of at least 2,000 photos, but already at least 42 of these assault allegations have been dismissed and deemed invalid, and 65 service members have been disciplined in connection with those allegations. And as we saw before, many of the photos show just bumps and bruises, things that could have very well been acquired just going about anyone's daily life. Now, that said, can't the release of these photos simply be exploited by terrorist groups? Doesn't the Pentagon have a point there?
Well, I think they probably could be exploited by terrorist groups, but they might be. It doesn't necessarily mean that Americans will be killed, but I think that the larger issue here is our system, and this was a terrible blot on our system that the U.S., who led the drive for these anti-torture international agreements over the years, is now guilty of that itself. And I think this is a violation of U.S. law. It was a lawless administration, the Bush administration, and I think actually some people should have been prosecuted over this, but Obama declined to do that because, of course, he's afraid that if he prosecutes a prior Republican, that if the next president's a Republican, somebody in his administration, including himself, might be vulnerable. So I think also he had an agenda that he human rights, and the United States is supposed to be the bastion of human rights, and of course this went counter to that. So I think we need to release these no matter what the consequences are, simply for the sake of the republic and for our system of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of the press.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you so much for chiming in with some of your expertise there. That was Ivan Eland, Senior Fellow and Director of the Center on Peace and Liberty at the Independent Institute.